My sister Emily asked our grandfather, not our father, to walk her down the aisle. Years of cold family values led to that choice. Our parents raged, relatives whispered, church friends asked questions. I didn't plead. I did this. By morning, the threats stopped, and the guest list changed. I'm 35. I have a brother, Liam, he's 23, and a sister, Emily, she's 29. We grew up in the United States, in the Midwest, in the Chicago suburbs, where Sundays empty the streets for church services, and the neighbors' lawns are clipped nearly to a line. Our parents are extremely religious and conservative. They talked more about family values than they ever practiced them. They wanted a son badly and were wildly disappointed when first I arrived, and then another girl, my sister Emily. I was their firstborn. Grandma Helen told me that, when they found out Mom was expecting a girl, they seriously considered not keeping me, but in the end, citing their religious beliefs, they kept the pregnancy. When I was just 2, Mom sent me to my grandparents because my presence at home supposedly worsened her depression. That's how my childhood with Helen and Walter began. In a small house with a maple by the steps, where summer smelled like wet soil and mint from Grandma's garden. I formed a special bond with Grandpa. He taught me to ride a bike with astonishing patience. First he held the seat and jogged beside me around the block. Then he let go, and I rode on my own. I can still feel it. The wind in my face, the click of spokes, the shouts of neighborhood kids on the next street. Those lessons weren't just about balance. They were about having an adult beside me who didn't raise his voice, didn't shame me, just believed I could do it. Grandma, for her part, taught me gardening. How to loosen the soil, how to tell a weed from a seedling, how to wait for the first peony to open. I watched flowers unfurl and loved my small corner of nature. The patch she gave me at the back of the bed. Those skills still help me stay calm, ground me, literally. My parents didn't visit me once until I turned 7, until neighbors and people from our church started asking out loud why their eldest daughter wasn't living with them. Then, so it wouldn't look strange, Mom and Dad came and took me from Helen and Walter, despite my protests. I cried and begged to be left where there was stability, warm arms, predictability. But they buckled me into the car and drove me home, to the very house where I felt like a guest. 3 more years went by, and it seemed like our parents found their joy again. They were expecting a second child. When it turned out to be another girl, you could see the disappointment, though it wasn't as loud as it had been with me. Thankfully, Emily didn't have to live what I did. She wasn't sent to the grandparents. She grew up with our parents. But the difference in how we were treated was obvious. From me, it was expected that I'd help Mom with practically everything in the house. Dishes, cleaning, cooking, wrangling the little kids in Sunday school, an endless list that told me, day after day, that usefulness mattered more than my feelings. When it came to Emily, the rules were softer. She was pitied more, understood more. Her mistakes were treated as a normal part of growing up, not a personal failure to be shamed for. School was the same story. They pressed me to excel at everything. Only A, no A. You need more clubs and activities. They signed me up for extra classes, and any deviation from the perfect trajectory was taken as a sign of ingratitude. When Emily started school, the atmosphere for her was much calmer. Our parents still cared about her grades, but they didn't shove her into rigid rails. They let her choose what she liked and let her go to school events without endless lectures. And the way they celebrated our achievements, especially that, was night and day. If I won an academic contest or wrote a flawless test, it rarely came with more than a short, good job. Any progress Emily made became a mini party. Cake, a family photo later posted on Facebook, calls to relatives. I couldn't understand for a long time how the same parents could raise 2 daughters so differently. It was hard to grow up under constant criticism while watching my sister live, relatively, an easier childhood. Even so, I tried not to be angry at Emily. She didn't choose my childhood or hers. I helped with homework, went to her performances, tried to be a steady example so that, at the very least, she'd have an older sister she could lean on. We kept a warm bond, even with the ache gathering inside me. 6 years after Emily was born, everything changed. Liam arrived, the long-awaited son. Our parents threw a full-on feast. Gifts, people from our church community, the pastor's congratulations, long speeches about the heir. From day one, you could see he got special treatment. Expensive clothes, the trendiest toys, the best stroller, a pricey crib, and a stunning nursery. Nothing like the rooms Emily and I had. But it wasn't just the things. They gave him far more attention. Thousands of photos, videos of every little goo, sentimental posts on social media. They didn't miss a single pediatrician's appointment, argued over the vaccine schedule, hunted for the best specialists. With me or my sister, they'd never been that involved. The inequality didn't fade as Liam grew. He was excused from chores we did by default. Let the girls take out the trash. Let the girls load the dishwasher. Let the girls mow the lawn. Liam has to get to his tutor. His birthdays became grand productions with pricey gifts, balloons, and rented venues. Emily and I felt second class beside all that. To be honest, I was used to it by then. For Emily, it was her first head-on collision with what I'd lived through, and it hurt. We ran to Grandma and Grandpa's even more, like to a shelter. Countless days in their garden, evenings by the fireplace. Long talks about fears, dreams, and how heavy home felt. Grandma always told us, "You're not alone. You have us." When I hit my teens, my parents slapped a rebel label on me, just because my views didn't match their church dogma and political slogans. If I tried to explain my position, Mom would start crying and say I was driving her up the wall. If I showed sadness or anger near her, she'd snap, scream, then disappear from contact for hours, as if I didn't exist in the house. When Emily got older and began to show her own mind, she developed anxiety. For years, Mom refused to take her to a specialist. "You don't need that. Pull yourself together." And when Emily had panic attacks, Mom said she was causing inconvenience and ruining the atmosphere in the house. One night, it became unbearable. Our parents didn't bother to hide it anymore. We were disappointments. We shouldn't have been born. God had sent them a test. Those words fell like stones, and we couldn't take it any longer. Feeling lost and hurt, Emily and I packed bags and drove to Helen and Walter's, to the house that smelled like mint and fresh cookies in the evenings. Our parents found out fast where we were, and by morning they were on Grandma's porch. They demanded we come back immediately. For the first time in a long while, Grandma spoke to them hard, asked how they'd explain what was happening at home, why they treated their daughters that way. Dad, eyes down, muttered that he provided food and a roof, and what more did we want? And then Grandpa, calm, even-tempered Walter, raised his voice for the first time. He told my father he should be ashamed of how he treated his children, and he added, if our father did anything again that harmed us, he would call Child Protective Services, CPS. That genuinely scared them. Liam was still small, and the prospect of dealing with state services, especially in Cook County where, as the neighbors said, those calls are taken seriously, was the last thing they wanted. Grandpa didn't back down. He said straight out that we deserved better parents than the ones they had been so far, and I can still see him turn to my mother and say, "You are my daughter. But I never treated you the way you treat your children." My mother's face flushed in red patches. She was ashamed. That fight in Helen and Walter's kitchen was a turning point. For the first time, someone stood up for us openly and hard. Not with "be patient," but with action. With the threat to call the place you call when a child truly needs protection. After that night, the situation at home shifted a little. Our parents, especially my father, were clearly rattled by Grandpa Walter's hard words and his threat to call Child Protective Services, and they started behaving a little more calmly. Liam still got special attention, but the shouting and punishments aimed at Emily and me came less often. When I turned 18, I wanted college badly. I dreamed of getting out of the Chicago suburbs and trying campus life, even at an ordinary state school. My parents were adamantly against it. We fought hard. My mother kept saying that, as a girl, I should focus on marriage and children. She repeated that men don't like women who are too educated, and that campuses are a hotbed of depravity and liberalism. My father backed her up, mocking the idea of a woman's mind, earning a degree and insisting school would be useless to me. It hurt deeply to hear my own parents talk me out of independence for no other reason than that I was a girl. Despite their protests, I applied to several schools at once and got in. I was accepted into an honors program and received a scholarship, so my parents didn't have to pay for tuition or housing. They were furious that I disobeyed them. I didn't care. For the first time, I felt like I was steering my own life. I picked up part-time work on campus, first the library desk, then a cafe off the quad, and started putting money aside bit by bit. That season was a turning point. I learned to juggle adult responsibilities, balancing classes, work, and the rare scraps of a personal life. It wasn't easy, but every past exam and every month that closed in the black made me stronger, more independent. All that time, my parents called once in a while to see how I was. The calls were strange. A few formal questions, zero real interest. By graduation, I expected neither support nor praise. In the end, I finished my degree and took a full-time job in my field. Thanks to the shifts I'd worked during school and a little discipline, I saved enough to rent an apartment with roommates on the north side. Our contact with our parents grew rarer, then almost vanished, and not only because of me. It seemed they were perfectly content with the distance. Birthdays and holidays turned into the occasional perfunctory happy birthday text, sometimes a card with no note. When life hit harder than usual, trouble at work, a breakup, my first impulse was still to call family. I stopped myself. Going back to those emotional roller coasters we'd lived through with our parents felt unbearable. Little by little, it became a deliberate choice to cut them out of my life entirely. The only person in the parental circle I stayed close to was my sister, Emily. When it was her turn to apply to college, our parents threatened to throw her out if she dared get into all that schooling. I told her to move in with me. I needed to be sure she could keep chasing her own dream and build a future without parental bans and dictates. Emily moved, enrolled in a local college, a community college with a transfer path to a state school, and I worked hard to carry us both. Rent, utilities, Trader Joe's runs, sometimes bus tickets back to campus. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to back her education and see her through. During that time, our bond grew even stronger. We shared a kitchen and the daily load, and I took comfort in knowing that, despite the mess with our parents, I could create a safe, steady space for my sister to grow. When Liam got older, he didn't face what Emily and I had faced. Of course he didn't. Our parents proudly sent him to college. They paid application fees, test prep courses, campus tours in Michigan and Wisconsin. More than that, they had saved up enough for him to study without financial strain. Dorm deposits, a 4-school laptop, private tutors. Liam clearly got chances and privileges we never had. I felt a complicated mix, happiness for my brother and the ache of contrast. Even so, Emily and I held the line together, determined to get past the weight our childhood put on us. Through all the rises and dips, Grandma Helen and Grandpa Walter stayed our constant warmth. They called, sent cards, came to the city when they could. A few years ago, Grandma passed. Emily and I rushed home to our old suburb in Cook County to be with Grandpa. It was the first time in a long while we saw our parents. They greeted us with a nod, like we were strangers. I held back tears, too many memories and too little tenderness in their eyes. I didn't want my mother scolding me for making a scene, so I just hugged Emily and took Grandpa's hand a little tighter. After the funeral, we started visiting Walter more often. We shuffled schedules, caught the Metra, got to his place, cooked lunch together, or simply sat on the porch and remembered how he taught me to keep the handlebars steady, how Grandma taught me to tell peonies by the bud. On weekends, we gave whole days to his house, swapped bulbs, sorted tools in the garage, set the timers on the sprinklers, walked the nearby park. Over one of those lunches, Grandpa suddenly said he was proud of how I look after my little sister. I froze and felt warmth rise to my eyes. It had been years since anyone in the family had honestly recognized my effort. Walter smiled, ruffled my hair lightly, and added that Emily was lucky to have me, and that he believed in my change the world in small steps potential. His eyes shone with pride. That look is fixed in my memory forever. Liam, our parents' favorite, kept his distance from us, maybe afraid they'd drop him the way they had once dropped us. In recent years, Emily and I bumped into him only at the occasional family thing, or heard from cousins how much our parents were doing for him while ignoring us. They bought him a couple of used cars to make the campus commute easier, paid the security deposit on a house so he could move out, and last year even gifted him a trip to New York with his girlfriend. A break, since he works so hard. We learned about it in the relatives group chat. The congratulations emojis flew in one direction only. Recently, Emily, who'd been with her boyfriend Robert since college, got engaged. The news filled me with joy. They're a wonderful match. There's a quiet certainty in the way they look at each other that you can't fake. The proposal was truly magical. A river walk, yellow light on the bridge, Robert down on one knee. Emily glowed, showing her ring to anyone who wanted to share the moment. She posted the photos, and off it went. Relatives called, wrote, left warm comments. Of course, the news reached our parents. Our phones blew up with their calls and messages. Surprising, after years of silence. Emily and I traded a look. Why now? Why suddenly become part of our happiness after keeping their distance for so long? When Emily finally answered Mom all but gushed. How happy she was. How she'd long waited for this day. Emily thanked her, polite, brief. And then the hard part began. Mom started firing questions. Who Robert was, where he worked, whether they could meet in person. Knowing their habit of arriving with a holy mission, Emily tried to deflect and cited the rush of planning. But my father, likely sitting right beside her, cut in and added firmly that they had earned the right to meet the man their daughter was going to marry. The push worked. Emily, after a pause, agreed, but said she wouldn't come alone. I'm bringing my sister. To our surprise, our parents agreed without argument. On the appointed day, the three of us, Emily, Robert, and I, went to our parents' house. The tension was there from the threshold. They met us with tight smiles, as if rehearsing a scene of an ideal family. Mom greeted Robert with a showy warmth, offered homemade lemonade. We sat at the table, and I could see how each of us sat a little straighter than usual. Sensing the stiffness, Robert tried to soften the room. He talked about himself, his work, how he and Emily loved weekend trips to the Botanic Garden. The conversation eased over into the wedding, dates, venue, guest list. And that was when the interesting part began. Our parents started gently hinting that it would be wonderful if the father of the bride, our dad, were the one to walk Emily down the aisle, and that Mom should have an important role. Somewhere in the middle of the attention. Emily and I exchanged a glance. Dad moved past the hints. It was important to show family unity in front of the relatives, so there wouldn't be awkward questions. Mom nodded along, adding that she didn't want Robert's family thinking Emily had no parents, and therefore they needed to be present in significant roles. Hearing that, my sister and I looked at each other again, and I felt Emily's shoulders go tight. It was suddenly clear why we'd been invited. Our parents were afraid Emily wouldn't invite them to the wedding and didn't want relatives asking awkward questions. It could bruise their standing in the family and at our church. I shook my head, seeing the real motive. Emily thanked them politely for the offer, then said, calm and even, that she had already decided who would walk her down the aisle. My father, curious and gently performative, asked whom she had chosen for such an important role. Emily smiled, steady. Grandpa Walter will walk me down the aisle. For a second they froze, their faces not quick enough to hide the shock. Expectation flipped to anger, hard to accept that their daughter had chosen her grandfather over them. The familiar pressure began. Mom. Sweetheart, by tradition, the father walks the daughter down the aisle. You can't break tradition. Emily. You know, Mom, I don't care about tradition when there's nothing behind it. I want Grandpa to be part of this moment. He was there when you both forgot you had daughters. You can come to the wedding, but as guests, like the rest of the relatives. Dad pressed his mouth into a line. You can't just push us aside. We're your parents. I laughed out loud. They hadn't expected that. Looking my father in the eye, I said, You and Mom forgot you were parents a long time ago. For years you treated us like excess. You have no right to demand that Emily listen to you. The words landed, hard. He bristled, my mother flushed, but Emily stood firm. You don't get to declare parental rights after ignoring us for years. I added, Actions have consequences. You don't get to rewrite the past. Emily drew the line clearly. Their role at the wedding would be limited, like any other guest. Attend if they wished, but no control. The meeting ended on a bitter note, but my sister didn't budge. Leaving the house, I felt two things at once. Admiration for her courage and the dull disappointment that our parents still didn't see where their choices had led. From that day, the calls and messages poured in, from our parents and a few relatives, accusing us of selfishness and cruelty because a father had been denied the right to walk his daughter down the aisle. We stayed quiet. A few hours after the engagement news swept through the family chats, something else came into focus. To everyone asking about Grandpa, Emily had already told him she was engaged. He was the first to congratulate her. But we hadn't said she wanted him to walk her down the aisle. We decided to do that in person and watch his face. This weekend we were headed to his suburb, where he lives alone now. Meanwhile, our parents kept at it, sending angry messages. My father even wrote Robert a long Facebook screed, demanded he bring his fiancée to reason because a man should take things in hand, insisted Emily had no right to ask her grandfather because tradition says father, and finished with a threat. If Robert allowed this, he and Mom wouldn't attend the wedding. Robert answered simply and calm, My fiancée will do what she wants. I fully support her. Whether you attend is your choice. I could almost see my father's face as he read it. He'd counted on compliance. The thought made me smile. That weekend, Emily and I drove to Grandpa Walter's. The road felt short. We were wired and couldn't wait to say the words. We sat on his porch with lemonade, talked about nothing and everything, and then Emily took a breath and said, Grandpa, I want to ask you something important. Please walk me down the aisle. You've been there all these years. I can't imagine anyone else doing it. Walter's eyes filled. He stood, hugged Emily so tightly it was as if he was afraid to let go, and said it would be a great honor. My throat stung, and the three of us stood there, holding on to each other, like those old evenings when Grandma Helen called us in from the yard for dinner. We told him about the conversation with our parents and about my father's message to Robert. Walter only smiled a little and said he'd handle our mother just fine if she decided to make a scene, and that nothing would stop him from walking Emily down the aisle. Emily's shoulders dropped. The tension slid off. We stayed until evening, tidied the garage, checked the smoke detectors, made a grocery list. Before we left, I hugged him again. This man had been the anchor we'd always lacked. Weeks went by. Wedding prep swept everyone up. A venue on the north side, calls with the officiant, the seating chart, the dress, fitting Walter's suit. I caught myself counting the days until I'd see Emily shining, walking toward Robert on Grandpa's arm. 3 months later, the day finally came, and it exceeded every hope. The space looked exactly as we'd wanted. Light, greenery, warm wood. Guests filled the hall. The air carried joy and a hum of expectation. One absence was especially noticeable: our parents. After we limited their role in the ceremony, they chose not to come. We accepted their choice. The ceremony itself was magical. Emily, in her dress, radiant, stood beside Grandpa. Love and pride lived in his eyes as they came down the aisle. Trusting Walter with that role was exactly right, and Emily's smile said everything. The room was full of warmth, laughter, kind toasts. Emily and Robert exchanged vows, promising each other loyalty and care. The celebration ran late. Dancing, jokes, embraces, photos against the lights. After the wedding, life settled into its new shape. Emily and I made a deliberate choice to block our parents on every channel, so they couldn't pour their drama and bitterness into our days. We still visit Walter regularly, trying to give him as much time as we can. The path has been hard, but we want only the people who truly care for us nearby. If you've stayed to the end, thank you. Tell us what you think in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos, and take a look at the earlier ones. They're right here. I wish you warm ties with those who truly love you, your parents, your grandfathers and grandmothers, and everyone who chooses you every day.